Hey guys, it's Lauren Egan here at the Bulwark, and I'm joined today by Colin Allred. He is a former member of Congress from Texas, and he ran for Senate last year against Ted Cruz, and he is running for Senate again, this time for John Cornyn's seat. And he's also a former linebacker for the Tennessee Titans. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So I want to start off with this redistricting shit show that's happening in Texas right now. And I just want to get your really honest, candid assessment of where things go from here. Because from my perspective, Democrats have obviously fled the state. They're trying to deny a quorum. This is a tactic that they've used in the past. And understandably, people always crack. It's really hard to sort of make this work long term. So from my view, I don't know how this ends. It just seems really hard. There's only so many tools that Democrats have. So give me your honest assessment of where this is headed, and is it just ultimately probably going to end in new maps being drawn?
Well, maybe. And just to give you a little background from me, before I was in Congress, after I played in the NFL, I was a voting rights lawyer, and I dealt with issues like this. And so I say maybe because no matter what happens at the legislative level, this is going to be challenged in court. And the one, safe harbor that we do still have in voting rights law when it comes to redistricting is that you cannot do racial gerrymanders. And this is, in my opinion, and I'm a little bit of an expert, this is a clear-cut racial gerrymander that will discriminate against Black and brown voters in Texas. The districts they're targeting are all majority minority. Many of the actual members of Congress that they're targeting are minorities themselves. And they have been so blatant and open in what they're saying they want to do that in many ways the court case is building itself. Now that still relies on, for us in Texas, that we have to deal with a Fifth Circuit that's incredibly hostile to voting, and then a Supreme Court that's shown itself to be hostile to voting. But you're asking where you think this is going to go. And my mind as a voting rights lawyer, I know this will go to the courts, but then on the ground, what I'm seeing is that the backlash is building. And then when you create more competitive districts, be careful and watch out what you wish for.
Do you think that backlash could be enough to stop Republicans from going through with this? Because, it just seems like, this is what Donald Trump wants, and it's what they're probably going to do. So how are you kind of thinking about the impact of that backlash?
Yeah. Well, I testified in Austin to these legislators and was looking at them and telling them, you don't have to do this. It's basically a very Texan trait that we would tell the White House, to go fly a kite. But I think it's likely that they will do it. The backlash that I'm thinking of is also the backlash to the day after, and saying that we know what you're doing, that this is so blatant that folks are fired up. They're angry. I was in a Black church in Fort Worth a couple of days ago on the 60th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. It was a packed house with folks just incredibly upset about what's going on, knowing that their congressional district in Fort Worth is being dismantled. A couple of days before that, I was in Missouri City in Fort Bend County, where they're also under attack. A huge group of folks there, fired up, upset about what's happening. People are paying attention. People are organizing, and the backlash is building.
I want to talk a little bit about your Senate race from 2024. You lost to Ted Cruz by about 8 points, and I'm curious just what your assessment is of that race. And you're running again. So what is something that you feel like you could do differently this time that you maybe didn't do last time around?
Yeah, let's just look at it and say the last election ended up going pretty negatively in a lot of places around the country. And we outran our presidential ticket by over 5 points. And, that's something that in the previous election in 2020, when Joe Biden lost by 5 points, then that would have been a very close race. And here, just the election went the other way. And so we have to recognize that. But I think what we have to do is learn the lessons from it. And that in many ways, this was about working people in an economy that they couldn't afford, feeling like they're looking for somebody who was on their side. And that's my story. I was raised by a single mother who was a public school teacher, never met my father, relied on the same public schools that they're often underfunding here in Texas on the YMCA. I know what it means for working people who are sitting there thinking, well, maybe somebody's going to help lower our costs. But the truth is they were lied to. And that makes me angry. especially as somebody who has been through this specifically, where my mom and I've gone to the grocery store, swiped her debit card, and couldn't afford what we needed that week and had to put some things back. They have done nothing but raise costs on working people. Also, they can, cut taxes for the rich. And so we have to make sure folks know that and know what's going on. And a lot has changed in the last 8 months. I mean, I know you feel that. We all feel that. But this is also something where this is going to be about the promises that they made that were not kept, but also just the unbelievable overreach that they have engaged in. And what I'm looking forward to most in this campaign is spending time and showing, not telling, working people that we care about them, that I know what we can do together to address what their biggest concerns are, that I've had those concerns myself. I know how to do it, that we have a rigged system that we can fix together.
I know you're facing a primary first, but do you view the big beautiful bill and like these Medicaid cuts and all of that as kind of like the message that you and other Democrats should be running on in 2026? Or what do you kind of think should be the overarching thing that the party's communicating to voters?
I think it's a big part of it. I mean, when I ran in 2018 for Congress, that was a year when they had gone after the Affordable Care Act and health care. And my opponent was somebody who, in a gerrymandered Republican district, had voted to repeal the Affordable Care Act something like 56 times or something. And by the end of it, he was saying, by the end of the campaign, he was saying that he was for the Affordable Care Act. I think this is going to be a meat and potatoes election. And as much as the threats to democracy, make me just stay up at night as a voting rights lawyer, as much as some of the constitutional overreach that I know is going to have long-reaching impacts concerns me. To me, this is going to be about, folks when they sit down at their kitchen table at night and they're thinking, what are we going to do if grandma gets sick? How are we going to replace that car that we know needs to be replaced? How are we going to send our kid to a good school? It's going to be about the economy, about healthcare, and about how they're making all those things harder when they said that they were going to be on their side. And that, to me, the bill is a part of it. It's a big part of it. It's a legislative, kind of package where you can point to things like saying, hey, this is going to raise your electric bills $800 a year because of what they did on renewable energy. But it's part of an overall picture that also includes tariffs, that also includes tax cuts for the rich, it also includes the incredible corruption that we're seeing. I think it's all part of that.
You mentioned that you outperformed Harris in Texas in 2024, and I'm curious why you think that is, and if there were specific positions that you took that were different from her that can help us sort of understand that gap.
Well, I mean, I think every race is different, of course, and listen, my family's from the Valley. They're from the border, Brownsville, Texas, which is the very tip of Texas. My grandfather was a customs officer there. I know that, and I was saying for some time that, we had to do something about the sense of chaos that particularly border communities were feeling, because if you're feeling in other parts of the country, just imagine what they're feeling, at the border. And so I think that's part of why we did so well in South Texas in comparison. I think the biggest thing is that what we have to do in this election, and I do think looking back is important, what I think we have to do in this election is understand that for working people coming out of COVID, they were the ones who were going into work every single day. They weren't doing remote work. They were the ones in many cases who, when we talked about, that 1 million Americans died, well, who was that amongst, right? They were the ones who, when schools were closed, they didn't have childcare, right? And that they came out of that, and that even that everything that we tried to do to try and make sure that our economy got back going, that they were working harder for less. And they were told in the last election that they were going to go right back to a great economy, that there's going to be a laser focus on them, and they were just flat out lied to. And I understand working people thinking that maybe that's something that I can believe in, but we have to make sure they know that they were just flat out lied to, and that it's not just my opinion. Like, to your point with that bill, that's a great example of it, but it's also this tariff policy is going to make this an incredibly expensive Christmas. I know what that means for these working families. And so, yes, the last election is important, but in some ways we got to move on from it and say what's happening right now is that it's harder for working people to get ahead. The American dream is slipping away. And at the same time, we're seeing an unprecedented level of corruption that's going to the wealthy and the well-connected. And that is a story that we can tell to working folks, and that I'm looking forward to doing, but I think we should do it around the country as well.
You mentioned the border stuff, and the Democratic Party, I think, is having a bit of a conversation right now about whether on the national level, like, do they need to moderate on some things or like create a bigger tent so that you can have people with different views on guns, border, abortion, like whatever it might be, especially if you want a real shot at winning in a red state like Texas. I'm curious how you think about that. And like your theory of the case of, what is needed to win statewide in Texas, because Democrats have been talking about winning there statewide for years,
Yeah.
and it hasn't happened.
Yeah. Well, I've won tough races. The district that I ran in 2018 was drawn for a Republican. It was gerrymandered for him. He'd been there for 22 years. He'd been unopposed in the previous election. And we beat him, pretty significantly. And when you do that, you then become the top target in the next election. And they couldn't get rid of me, so they gerrymandered the district. And I mentioned that to just say that, to me, this discussion is a little bit silly. The idea that we're not going to bring everybody in, like the idea that what we really need to do is just become more pure, and that if I'm a black civil rights lawyer, okay, like I could spend a lot of time talking about what I think these tests could be, but that's not how we're going to help anybody, right? In order to help folks, we have to bring more people into our coalition, including friends of mine like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, but also talk about real life. And, listen, I grew up around guns. I grew up going to a camp where we were shooting rifles when I was 7 years old. Like, let's talk about it. Let's talk about who we really are. Let's stop ceding all this ground culturally to Republicans before we could even get into the policy issues. And so I am not a fan of folks who think that what we really need to do is just become incredibly ideological. I think that doesn't make any sense at all. But what I do think that I've seen that sometimes folks can confuse with ideology is that if you talk about what people care about, and if you show them that you care, that then they will be responsive to that. But that's not just about like saying, one, policy or another. I do think you have to have policies that respond to that. But that's more about, how you're saying things and who you're talking to.
Yeah, and when we talk about like making the tent bigger, a difference in your Senate campaign experiences is you're probably going to have a more competitive primary this time around. I know we're really early in the cycle, but Beto O'Rourke is thinking about running, James Talarico. So how do you think about like navigating making that tent bigger, but also like you have to get through a primary phase as well this time?
Yeah. Well, I've always had primaries. Every time I've run, and when I ran in 2018 and flipped that seat, I had a 7-person primary and then a runoff. Had a primary last time when I ran for Senate. And so you're right. There's different levels and competitives, but I think you have to be confident enough in yourself and in what you believe that your message is not that different, regardless of whether you're running in a primary or a general election. And that's been my approach, in every election that I've had, which is that I'm not going to, try and just, swing from one way or another, because the whole thing I'm trying to tell folks is that I really believe what I'm saying, this is not just for
And
the
it's that
expediency
authenticity thing that we've been
Yeah,
talking
it's
about
not the
for
expediency
forever.
of the
Yeah.
moment, right? Like, and how can you have anyone believe you if you're just going to change it depending on which election and which electorate you're in front of, right? But I also think
Yeah.
that there is a fundamental, there's a fundamental decency, but also what most voters, even in a primary, want is fairly modest, right? What we're talking about here is oftentimes Black and brown working people who don't believe that government is going to do everything for them and aren't asking for that, right? What they're asking for is a shot and a chance and an opportunity, and to not be discriminated against, and to have certain ladders of opportunity in place so that their kids can get ahead. That's what they're asking for, right? And so I think in election after election, we've seen this play out, where it's not just about the identity of who's running, but who you're talking to. And if you think that you're talking to, an electorate that's online and that's incredibly well informed, I'm sorry, but that's just not going to be it, right? It's going to be working folks who have a lot going on in their lives, and you need to show, not tell, that you care about them.
How has your view of social media and how important that is in the job of being a politician changed over the course of your time in politics? Because I mentioned James Talarico. He's obviously like gotten a bunch of attention for his TikTok videos. And, you've run a few races in the past few years. Like, has that role of social media just changed and how you kind of approach the job.
I'm laughing.
I've seen those gym videos, so you know.
Well, I'm laughing because when I was in the NFL, our head coach at the time, Jeff Fisher, somebody posted something before a game and he was like, get off the social medias. And I did. And so like, I was like, okay, you know, and so I didn't.
You're probably healthier for it, but yeah.
And so I'm not like somebody who is dragged around by it. What I try and use it for is just as a tool to hopefully give folks some insight into what I'm thinking. In this campaign in particular, I want to do more of kind of just like, okay, what am I thinking right then? And just say it. And I am firmly of the belief though, that you can overestimate the power of social media and you can underestimate it. Right. And that we used to say in the NFL after a game, it's never as good as you think it is. It's never as bad as you think it is, because the tape is going to be somewhere in the middle. And I think that's kind of how I see this, which is that like, yes, it's incredibly important to try and, you know, deliver what you want to deliver because it's your megaphone. That's your channel. Right. But I also think that, you know, many of the people who we're ultimately going to be communicating with are not on social media. Like my mom is not on social media and she's going to be voting in all these elections. Most working people don't have time to spend a whole lot of time on social media, even if they are on there, right? Because they're working 2-3 jobs, taking care of their kids, trying to keep a roof over the kid's head and put food on the table. By the time they get to bedtime, they're wiped out, right? And so I think we have to understand that and recognize that in the last election nationally, we lost folks who earned less than $50,000 a year. And that is a huge problem for the Democratic Party, and that's not going to be fixed online, right? That is not going to be fixed through, you know, smooth video editing or anything like that. That has to be fixed through, you know, authentic candidates telling their actual life experiences. There's a young Jeezy line I think about where he says some rappers just write, I recollect. Yeah, I'm not having to write down what working people are going through. I remember what they are going through. And I think that's what we have to do, is use that authenticity to reach people where they are. Yes, online some, but oftentimes in their communities.
All right, Colin Allred, let's leave it there. Thank you so much for being here. And, you know, we got a long way to go till 2026. So please come back.
All right. Sounds good. I appreciate you.